We're live.
On Monday, another Monday Live with Eden and Callie.
Woo!
It's going to become a habit, hopefully. We'll see. So, this week, we're talking about a spicy Reddit post. Eden posted on the Leet Code Reddit, and it got, 145,000 views and over 500 upvotes, and some pretty spicy comments. So I'll start by just reading your post because I thought that it was so kind and encouraging and pretty not controversial, especially coming from you who is a FAANG staff engineer. So here was Eden's post. It's the way that FAANG does interviews is 100% outdated. It sucks to see so many people grinding so hard on leak code and working their ass off to get these jobs that are gatekept by DSA questions that we never use at work. When I did my interview training at Google, they even told us that there's no correlation between how well someone does in an interview and how well they do at the job. For those of you who are feeling discouraged due to failing a DSA interview, just know that your leak code skill does not correlate to how good of a software engineer you are. Unfortunately, it's a game you gotta play to win, but once you finally get your foot in the door, I promise it gets easier. You got this.
Yeah,
That
very
was so
controversial.
kind and refreshing to hear. I don't know, take it or leave it to Reddit to make something controversial out of such an encouraging post. So, um, why why do you think it's such a hot topic? Why do you think it struck such a nerve?
Yeah, I think like this as uh Kelly and I were talking about this, and I was talking about how like this really brought me back to college where like the super elitist like CS majors. It's like yeah, I think a lot, especially like if you have studied leak code a ton and it has gotten you that job, for someone to say that this isn't actually a good indicator if you're good. I mean, maybe that's why it's like hard to hear, to be like, hey, I've spent years perfecting this thing and now you're trying to tell me that it's a waste
Mm.
of time or not
Mm-hmm.
useful. And so it's like maybe subconsciously or consciously it's like, no, it's just like you're lazy if you don't do it, or yes, it is a good indicator because that'll make you feel better because you passed it.
Mm-hmm.
you know? And
Yeah.
so that's my guess of why. It's interesting because it's like I'm surprised, because at first I'm like, I'm surprised so many people are defending like large companies so much. Like, what do you owe them? Because like the
Mm-hmm.
companies themselves aren't even doing this. Like I worked at Google and I literally was in the training where they told us that there's no correlation. They were like, we did research for months and months and we could not find any. Like there was one correlation of like super random where they were like, I can't remember. It had like nothing to do with performance. They tried everything they could to try to find like correlations or anything, and they couldn't. And it's so funny that like these people are like, no, obviously that's not true. Otherwise, why would they do it? And I'm like, but
Mm-hmm.
they said that. Like, why would they lie about that? So yeah, it's like it's really interesting. And I think that's what it comes down to. It's like these people have studied really hard through leak code and it got them this job and now they feel superior almost. And it's kind of like, I think you said the other day, it's like that Kim quote or Courtney, whoever said it, like nobody wants to work these
Nobody wants
days.
to work these days. You need to get your ass up and work. Yeah, very much Kim K vibes.
Yeah. So I don't know, maybe that's why it's controversial. It's like it is kind of attack. I mean, maybe people feel attacked as an individual when you say that kind
Mm-hmm.
of thing, maybe.
Yeah, I can see. them thinking, well, if this is how I worked really hard and I was successful because of it, are you saying I don't deserve it, or I haven't worked hard, or that other people who I think are lazy could get it? It definitely must have struck a personal nerve rather than just saying it for what it is, which is something that you literally know from firsthand experience. Because that was surprising, and there seemed to be three main buckets of that feedback in all the hundreds of comments from your post. So there was that where, well, you just need to start working harder, stop complaining. Was this, some shock to you? Like, play the game. And I just want to be like, do they know who they're talking to? Like, do they know? Yeah, like, who are you?
Yeah, stop complaining.
Um, but then there's two, it seemed like two other themes, which was interesting that they would both agree, or most people seem to agree, but then what came out of that, or what the next thought was, differed. So it's like agree that it sucks, but then there's no other alternative.
Mhm.
Or people agree it sucks, but it is effective. So I guess for you, Eden, okay, if we can agree, yeah, it sucks, do you think it's still necessary to have that, or to focus on it when even the companies themselves know that there's no correlation?
Yeah, I mean, there's some companies trying different things. So like when I left Google, I honestly, one of the main reasons I applied at Slack was because I knew they didn't do data structure interviews.
Mhm.
And I kind of like, because
That's
at
it.
that point, I was already at Google for 2 years, and I basically blocked data structures, algorithms out of my brain because I was like, I got the
Mhm.
job. I don't need to know this stuff anymore.
Yeah.
And so the idea of studying that again, I was like, that sounds horrible. So at first I was like, maybe I can switch teams within Google, but I couldn't really find anything because I was like, I really don't want to study again. And then someone told me about Slack, and their whole thing was they tell you not to practice. Like, we're only going to
Really?
ask you stuff. Like, they basically were like, it's silly for you to study. Like, you work as an engineer. We're just going to ask you engineering questions to see what your level is. So don't prepare.
Wow. Good for
But
Slack.
the, so it's kind of hard. So it's like, in order to make up for the fact that they're not doing data structures and algorithms, then they're a little pickier about your technical skills. So the like assessment was very time consuming. It took me like 15 hours to do my like pre-assessment. It was like this project where I basically had to create this like some emoji app. They would give me this thing and I had to do it and take home. And that took a long time. It took me, yeah, like 15 hours probably. I mean, they say like, oh, only spend a few hours, but obviously if you want to look good, you're going to spend a lot of time on it. I
Mhm.
spent a ton of time. And then when I got to the in-person interview, it wasn't data structures and algorithms. It was more like one interview was discussing the code that I wrote. Another interview was more like architectural, like how would you design Slack?
Mhm.
How do you handle notifications, that kind of stuff. And then there was a behavioral and maybe another technical that I can't really remember where I did actually have to code. But yeah, it was stuff that you didn't need to study for. It wasn't like random algorithms that you
Mhm.
needed to study. It was like actual
Yeah.
engineering questions. Um, which so yeah, I guess like I think that works better, but then the thing that's hard about that is usually the take home thing is a lot of work.
That's
So
the
then people are
alternative.
like, well, if I'm applying to like 5 different companies and I have to do 15-hour assignments for each one, like I don't who has time for that?
Yeah.
And it worked for me because it was
Hmm.
like, oh, I'm only applying to one place. And I wasn't very tied to it because I was still working at Google technically. So I was kind of like, oh, I'll try this out. But
Yeah.
imagine if I was, I don't know, laid off and I needed to apply to like a ton of places, and I had to do
That's
10 of
interesting.
those. Like, that's like a full-time job almost.
Yeah, applying to jobs is definitely a full-time job in and of itself, especially with assessments and having to study. That's an interesting um, contrast to make where, okay, you can grind leak code, you can study leak code for 15 hours, and then maybe you might feel better about applying for multiple jobs. Or if you already know this one company that you want to work for, you're not applying to dozens of jobs, then going for a company that doesn't use data structure and analysis in their interview process might be the way to go. So that's, I mean, yeah, I can see where depending on the company and the person, it's very dependent. But for the fact that the FAANG, all of the FAANG companies do that, and it's just, the huge market share that they have for employees, and the fact that so many engineers do want to work for them, it's pretty prevalent. Can't really, it seems like it's hard to get away from at any point in your career.
Yeah, especially if you want to start at a large company. But like, yeah, there's like Slack. I actually interviewed at. I think the companies realize this is a real issue. Like, nobody wants to do data structures and algorithms, but also nobody wants to spend 10 plus hours on a assessment. Like, when I was thinking about leaving Slack, I was like, oh, I'll apply to some other companies to see what they're like. And I remember one, I think it was Airtable or something. They gave you an option, which I thought was interesting. Like, you could either do a one app, like for your assessment, you could do a 45-minute interview, data structure interview, or you could do a take home.
Oh, and the candidate got to choose? Like you could
Yeah.
choose?
You're
Oh,
like, which one sounds
that's
like
great.
less bad? You can
Mm-hmm.
pick. And then they also, if you did the take home, I think you got paid. Like, they give you $250 to do the take home or something.
Wow, that's so considerate. This is Airtable.
I think it was
Good, good job,
Airtable.
Airtable, or
Yeah.
whatever company actually does that.
Pretty sure.
That's good.
Yeah, but I remember also telling my friends about it, and they were like, it was funny because I thought they would be like, oh, cool. Like, yeah, at least you get some money for doing it. But they were like, wow, what a slap in the face. $250 for 10 hours of coding. And I was like,
What about
huh.
$0 for 10 hours of coding?
Yeah, I think it's like the mindset is so different too. I mean, that's like
Hmm.
a whole nother topic of like new junior engineer versus more senior, because they're like, oh, at the staff level, like, you're gonna make me do this stupid like take
That's
home.
true.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
can't you just like look at the work at Slack I did? Like, it's there, you use it.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, at the same time, it's like, I mean, they don't, what are they gonna do? Just trust you and your manager? I understand
Yeah.
that they have to do. So I think their whole thing is like, oh, at a certain level, why are you making me do this assessment? Just like give me the interview, the real interview, or don't. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what is there to assess at this level of experience that you need to make
Yeah.
sure I'm qualified to talk to your real engineers, you know?
Mm-hmm. It's
Anyway, that's kind of
true.
a tangent, but
I mean, it's relevant because each level, you can't assess a junior engineer the same way you do a senior and a staff engineer. That goes for any job. And so I know that a lot of companies do have different rubrics or questions that they ask, but a lot of times they're kind of looking for the same thing, or they're not quite calibrated or attuned to the exact needs that that level needs. It's more of a
mhm.
company wide because, I mean, on the company side of things, and I've seen it on the business side, it's more of a matter of restriction of policy and what's easiest to roll out, what's easiest to get candidates in the door, evaluate them, give them a score. And unfortunately, that's the larger the company, the more true that becomes. So yeah, just varies a lot per company, but
Yeah. And like, yeah, FAANG is like, it reminds me of like college apps, like, the Common App where all the like really big schools
yes,
just look at the same exact
yes.
thing. And
Oh,
you're like, is this really the best
ugh.
way to like tell if
Mm-hmm.
I should go to this school? But
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It scales. Is it the best way to find the best candidates? No, but it's like good enough that it keeps the company running. And like,
Mhm.
I don't think people realize that FAANG, like, I don't know how Google has done this, but they've made it so it feels like you have to be like super smart to work there. You
Mhm.
know, like, but it's such a
Mhm.
huge company, and like what you work on is so specialized and specific that you actually don't need to be that skilled of an engineer,
Interesting.
because
I
you're
mean,
kind of like for real a cog in the wheel, like so much that you barely even matter. You matter in that you make the money, but like your skill doesn't matter that much. So they've like somehow like, because I totally thought this when I was in college. I was like, this is the place where all like the smartest engineers work.
mhm.
I want to be there. And then you
Yeah.
join and you're like, how did they trick me into believing this is a place where I can grow as an engineer and become like
I,
innovative?
mhm.
When really I just like copy and paste things and do whatever I can to keep the ad machine going. You know,
Mhm.
I
To
like
keep it.
felt like a code monkey there
Yeah.
almost.
Yeah. I mean, the bigger the company, it's interesting. And especially coming straight from school, I would imagine in some ways they want you to be generalized so that then they can teach you this one exact thing and that's all that you do. And so it would be harder to find a fit if you were really good at one thing and now suddenly you have to do something else. So it's, I guess, that generalized knowledge,
Yeah,
it's
they just
hard to
want
test
people who
for.
are like, I mean, if you can do a data structures interview well, that means you're good at just like studying for the sake of studying. Like, you know, like data structures, it doesn't make you a better engineer. So if someone is already willing to put in all that, like, because if you're studying for this, it means you're studying purely to get this job. And so that
Yeah,
to them makes it easier. It's like you must really want to work
you
in
must be
FAANG.
desperate.
Yeah. You
That's
must really want to work in
true.
FAANG,
Ugh.
and that's great.
Hmm.
And it was funny because someone on the Reddit post said something like, "Oh, of course there's a correlation. Otherwise, they might as well like just pick people out of random." And I was like, honestly, yeah, like it would be just as good because the work that I did there, like I learned more at Slack in like 1 month than I did in my 2 years working at Google.
Really? Why? Why? Why do you think?
I think because like, so I worked on YouTube comments when I was at Google, and it was such a like specific part of the product. Like you work in this tiny bubble. Like I remember my first like task to do was to like change the color of the heart, like the creator heart, to like
Hmm.
a different shade of red. You know,
Hmm.
like it's
Yeah.
stuff like that, and you're like, maybe the first couple months you learn a lot of like people communication skills, like how to tell people if it's done, how to
Mm.
make requests, stuff like that. But you don't learn
Yeah.
any technical skills because you're like, all I'm doing is like changing the
Color.
red to slightly redder, or
More
like
bright.
change. I remember like one day I was like about to lose it because I was like I got this assignment to change from like this certain gray to opalescence gray. And I was like, what am I doing here? Like opalescence gray? Like this is my life. Like now I know about every shade under the like sun and the YouTube branding guide. You know, it was
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
I'm not innovating. I'm just like I would slightly change something, see if it made people use YouTube more, maybe add a notification, maybe
Oh.
change the wording. Oh,
Hmm.
that brought, you know, because if it brings up watch time by like 0.01%, that's like millions and millions of dollars for the
Hmm.
company. So I would like another thing I did is like I moved the like button like to a different part. Like instead of like it was like, comment, downvote. We were like, oh, let's put the like next to the downvote and see what happens. Like that's all we
Hmm.
did every day.
Hmm.
And as you can imagine,
Um,
like you could get like a monkey to do the work that I was doing. And so
that's
they have to find a way to convince these people that it's like, because if you look at it at face value, it's like yeah, you're getting paid well. Like, but Google has tricked you into moving buttons and feeling smart about it. You know, like people think they're really smart for working there, but I'm like, you just like spent all this time studying and grinding just to move buttons around. And then they trap you by like, they give a lot of like stock grants, like they keep adding more and
Hmm.
more to try
Yeah.
to convince you to like not harness all the work and studying you did, but be like, hey, how about you monitor like our ad configuration and only that, and don't learn any more for the next 20 years, but get really good at this one thing that makes us millions of dollars
Hmm.
instead of working
Interesting.
somewhere that actually grows you.
Yeah, that is very entrapping. Because then, if you do ever want to leave, you don't really have the skills to get hired somewhere else. You have to go back to studying. And then, if you don't want to go back to studying and if you don't even have time to do that, then you're just like, might as well stay here. But it's a good point to make that you said something about it teaches you how to communicate or just seems like gives new grads a good sense of what it means and what it looks like to work on a team and in a company, and there's a
Mm-hmm.
level of professionalism and things that you should consider and just a different environment besides the academia or the studying that they've been doing. So
Mm-hmm.
I think, I mean, as someone who's not an engineer myself, yeah, I look at people, I kind of look at all engineers just like, wow, I don't know what you do. Like, this is magic to me.
Not much.
So, I mean, when you make it sound like it's not much, but I'm like, yeah, I couldn't do that. Like, I love me some Excel spreadsheets, but, putting it together in something else, that's totally different. But, um, yeah, I kind of forgot where I was going with that because it seems like, yeah, a lot of, for Google and FAANG, they do have this reputation and they just have so many people that once you do get there and you do get in, even if you do see what it's really like, at least you have that on your resume. Maybe you go somewhere else and it helps you kind of figure out what you want to do. But it does seem like there's a mismatch between what they're presenting and kind of promising to you and what they're actually offering. And maybe, it's not bad to just say, hey, you can make a lot of money and you're just going to move buttons all day. You don't have to be that good of an engineer. That's fine. But that mismatch between you're gonna love it, you're gonna become
You're
like
so
a
smart.
great
Work with the
engineer.
smartest.
Yes, work with our top engineers, work this, and you're like, I'm just in a box inside of a box inside of a box, changing colors. And the thing is, some people might be perfectly happy with that, but yeah, I think it's the misalignment, which kind of goes back to the interview process too. That's also misaligned between, okay, what are we actually doing versus what are we testing for? What are we looking for?
Yeah.
So, it's a
Yeah. And like,
conundrum.
I mean, yeah. And I guess, like, if you think about it that way, like, I guess their process works. It weeds out people who actually want to do engineering stuff, and it gets all the people who are willing to just like mindlessly grind
Yeah,
for
well,
exactly their criteria. Because like if you're
that's
willing to grind on something that doesn't matter, you'll be willing
yeah,
to move these buttons for us every single day.
that's a good point. Maybe they are testing for exactly what they want, which is that.
Yeah.
But there was one comment that I thought was really interesting because it brought up who are the type of people that have time to study leak code and to grind and just work hours and hours. It's usually new grads and
Mm-hmm.
people who might be okay with that mindless stuff. But one of the comments was, oh, it's just a form of ageism and like kind of gatekeeping in a way people
Mm.
who just don't have time or maybe are really busy with other things. And I thought that was an interesting, maybe unintended consequence of structuring
Mm.
these interviews.
Yeah,
But
that's an interesting point. I mean, yeah, I mean, I did a lot of interviewing of entry level at Google, and I don't think anyone was not a new grad.
mm,
Like, I think it's not even like, oh, maybe they care more about new grads. It's like, no, sometimes they don't even allow non-new grads to apply for those roles. Even at Slack, actually, we did not interview for junior roles. They only will allow interns to convert to junior engineers. So you basically have to be a student,
wow, I did not know
which
that.
is like straight up like, no, we will not. And then they have done like boot camp programs. Well, they will hire people from specific boot camps they partner with. But say if you're like a self-taught engineer applying for there's no way on the Slack website to apply for a junior role.
You have to go through your internship program and then apply again. Wow.
And then to be an
That's
intern, you probably have to be a student. That's the only place they're looking.
yeah.
You know, even like Slack, a company that I think is a little bit better about this kind of stuff, they still are super biased and they're like, well, it's just easier to find interns at these big colleges.
Yeah, because if they're there, it's they don't have to do any work to just find a bunch of interns and students. That's kind of sucks.
Yeah. I
But
mean, I
it's the
almost
game.
didn't, if I didn't know a recruiter at Slack, I probably wouldn't have been able to get an interview. They told me, they were like, this is the first time we've hired a junior engineer not from the intern program.
Wow. You're the
Because I wasn't
first
senior at that point yet.
trailblazer. You got hired as junior
Yeah.
through a recruiter, through a Slack recruiter, or like an external third party partner?
So I used to teach yoga, and one of the yoga teachers at my studio was a Slack recruiter. And I was like complaining to her about YouTube, and I was like, I don't know, I want to leave, but I don't want to study for interviews. And she was the one that told me. She was like, well, Slack does like normal people
Wow.
interviews. Give me your info,
Brilliant.
I'll set you up. And that was
That's
it.
amazing. You never know where it's going to come from. Connections, people, hobbies. That's why you got to have a life outside of work,
True.
also.
But yeah, I
Well,
wouldn't have been able to apply online because that wasn't a role on, like they
that's wild
opened it for
for
me.
you. Trailblazing. Look at you. It's
Yeah.
pretty, that's very impressive. And then you
I
made it
think
to
I was
staff.
just lucky. I don't think that's impressive. I think they were just like, all right, like we trust this recruiter.
Yeah,
We'll figure
but
it out.
you also, it takes a lot even to get in those positions. And then I think also what I've learned in my career is people are willing to make exceptions for the people they like. Like it
Mm-hmm.
kind of goes back to it's all a game. The interviewing process, their policies, who are they going to interview, the process. Like it is kind of a game, but you do have to play it. So going back to the post, the whole thing was just meant to be encouraging and not get into the details of what the alternatives should be and let's formulate an alternative here in a Reddit thread. No, got a little off track there. So going back to the heart of it, what more would you say to someone who is maybe who has been grinding leak code, who has been working hours and hours, but they're failing interviews, and like what what advice of encouragement do you have for them?
Yeah, I think it's more than the leak code grind for sure. And I think like what I was trying to get at is not like you shouldn't grind because you have to get your foot in the door, and that's the game to play, but to not, I don't know, like I think people take it to heart when they like fail a leak code question or they fail an interview and they think that they're not cut out for engineering. And I've like felt that way before. Like I didn't get accepted into the CS major at my school. I like failed the first time I took the intro to CS class. I had to retake it and all this stuff. So I think like I was kind of speaking to that of like this doesn't mean you can't be an engineer, you know? Like this isn't all like what it's about. And yeah, you have to figure it out because it's a game. And I think
Yeah.
like so that's like one thing I was trying to get across. Like don't think you're not smart or you can't be a good engineer because leak code is hard. And two, it's like there's just more to it. It's not just leak code. It's like you kind of have to know like the secrets of what they're looking for in these interviews too, which like you don't know what you don't know. So it's like if you're failing it, it might just be that you haven't been able to talk to the right people to know what you're doing wrong. Almost. It's like leak code is not the full picture. It's like 70% of it. And if you're not getting the other 30, then you're behind everyone else who's
Hmm.
passing these interviews.
That's a good way to put it because no matter how hard, even if you get everything literally optimal 100%, you're still not going to be passing the interview because there's more to it. And
Yeah.
yeah, especially for new grads, especially for early career, you don't know what you don't know. So that's why it's more to life than leak code.
Yeah.